You're listening to 94.4 FM Salford City Radio, the Friday Sports Show.
You're listening to Salford City Radio 94.4 FM with your host, Jimmy Petruzzi, on the Friday Sports Show, bringing you news from the local area and around the world. And we're very fortunate in this show to have spoken to some of the world's best sports people, athletes, coaches, people who work in the field of sport across a broad range of different disciplines and roles. We've also spoken to some of the most influential people in the world of psychology who've given us an insight into their take into mental health and psychology. And we aim to increase awareness of sport and participation. That's the idea, to sort of get people up and out there and get involved, and also give international perspectives and perspectives around the country of different roles, and to give us a really fascinating insight into what different roles involve. Today, a very interesting guest who's going to sort of talk about going to some of the scouting side of things, which is always an interesting thing, really. I suppose particularly for any sort of players listening to hear what's involved in that, but we'll sort of touch on what the role is more so. So it's Steve Martin, who's a Pro Academy Scout Coordinator at Burnley Football Club. Steve, welcome to the show. Great to have you on board.
Yeah, great to meet you, Jimmy. Nice to be on with you.
That's great stuff. I suppose, Steve, let's start from the beginning. How did you get involved in being a scout? What was your motivation and inspiration to go into scouting?
The inspiration was mainly, I started off as a coach, grassroots football coach, going back 17, 18 years ago with my son. I got rigged into it, sort of thing. You get pushed into that way because it's a voluntary role. Really enjoyed my time, had loads of memories. Obviously got to a time where my son moved on from football and I was stood in a field with nothing else to do, more or less. I did have a couple of players that was very, very good players. I didn't know how good they were. So I didn't know what to do afterwards. So I thought, well, I've seen these scouts standing out watching games. I'll go and see what the scouting world is all about.
Absolutely. And sort of, how's it been so far? I mean, what would you say some of the... if we start with the challenges, what's sort of the challenges in being a scout? I suppose for our listeners who might even be considering going into that, I suppose everyone's experience is subjective, but just from your take, what are some of the challenges of being a scout?
Well, the challenges are, you've got sort of a moral duty. I think there's a lot of people going to scouting, especially the bigger clubs, they're wanting to take all these children on board, and it's like a factory sort of thing, and I don't really agree with that side of it all. I think that you've got a moral duty because you're actually helping children progress in life and develop, not only as footballers but also as people as well. So
absolutely.
Sorry, go on.
No, that's a great point, Steve. Great point. Yeah.
So that's one thing that got me into it. As I said, that I did have a player that was really good. So the thing was, I wanted some more information, knowledge on how to get into scouting. I didn't actually know how to scout really. I knew obviously you could see everybody can scout up to a certain level. My wife can go and see the best player in a pitch on a Saturday afternoon, and everybody can do that. But it's to what level? And I came across a company called IPSO, International Professional Scouting Organisation. I was lucky 7 years ago, and they've just totally changed my opinion on football, really. My knowledge, it's just turned into a new book, a whole life of watching football, and how I look at people now, how players progress, and the development of children as well.
That's really interesting. Well, I think one thing that's sort of interested to know, Steve, you mentioned there, obviously, most people can sort of see a good, a player that's got ability, whether it be sort of, physically or technically or tactically. But is there anything specific that sort of you look for in a player? So, for example, if you're looking to see a potential player, what are some of the things that you might look at, Steve?
Well, obviously, children develop at different stages, and it's, what I look for is like a super strength, really. Whether the player at 6-7 years old can run quick, doesn't matter if he hasn't got the ball at his feet and he can't control the ball at this time, because he's still got plenty of time to develop that area.
Absolutely.
So you've got to sort of, I think a lot of scouts now, they go out and sort of look for too much. We've got some good coaches at Burnley that can progress these players on, and that's what your job is to see the super strength in a young child and bring him in and let him progress and develop in a professional academy environment.
Absolutely. So when you got the sort of scouting, do you have like a list of sort of attributes that you look for, Steve, or Do you just?
Well, not really. No, but as you say, the younger area, which I was doing voluntarily for the first year while I was at Burnley, because obviously you've got to, when you go into a club, you've got to sort of show what you can do and get your trust behind the people above you. And obviously I progressed into the academy side of it, and then into the pro academy where I'm actually getting paid now. So they trust me, my values obviously. So, but yeah, it's you don't look at certain things. You've got to go into a game when you're watching children with an open mind. Don't be watching one player. You've got to watch every single player really, and that's a hard thing. It's a hard skill to do really. Is that when I go to an academy game now, I don't just watch the one player. If I get told to watch one player, because you've got a chance of missing those other players who've got different abilities as well. Yeah,
and absolutely. And I mean, you mentioned there sort of. I mean, you're obviously very passionate about what you do, and sort of. I mean, has there been sort of highlights for you, Steve? What are some of the sort of highlights in sort of, working as a scout for you?
Yeah, there's been some, so far there's been some massive highlights, as you say, we go back to the beginning when I say you've got a moral duty. I've got parents come to me saying, I actually scout in the Yorkshire area, bring children from the Yorkshire area over to Burnley.
Okay.
And it's a travel sometimes, these parents have obviously got other children, and sometimes I've passed them on to other clubs like your Barnsley's, which is a bit nearer and a bit more, it's more friendly travel time for them to go down there. And I've seen people actually, these other clubs have signed these players, which I've recommended as well, which has been a massive boost for me. It's and help knowing that you're helping that player develop, and also knowing that you're cutting travel time down, and you're actually helping the overall family situation, sort of thing.
Yeah, and absolutely. It's interesting you say like the moral duty. I think that's important too, and I think that sort of realistically, a player sort of going all the way and making it as a professional. I think the stats I read somewhere is about 0.02% of Premier League or 0.5. I don't know off the top of my head, but I think. Do you think it's important that sort of the players have an idea, the parents are aware that to be a professional footballer, it really takes a lot of effort, energy. I suppose you might need a bit of luck along the way, but there's so many people who want to be a professional footballer. You don't want to put people off, obviously, but there's got to be a balance, really, like you say, to sort of pursue other things in life too, and not to put all your eggs in one basket. Yeah,
definitely, and I think that you've hit the nail on the head when you say you've got to be truthful to these people, because I get asked a lot of times to go and watch good, friends' children playing, or somebody knows somebody else's children who they recommended. And I'll say, look, I'll just tell you straight whether they're good or not, or they're not good enough, and you've got to be straight with people and tell the truth. And then obviously if they are good enough to come into a professional environment, then again, you don't promise the world to them. You've got to just tell them, look, you're in for a 6-week trial, enjoy the experience of being within a professional environment and training. And if you get asked to come back, that's a bonus. You don't promise things, but other people do promise these children. They build their hopes up, and it's all wrong, really, as you say. Going back to that moral duties that you should have within yourself as a professional scout.
Absolutely, and I suppose beyond that, it's sort of over to the club really in terms of what they have in place, and to sort of keep the players educated and other things as well. But I suppose for any young footballer, primarily their goal, Steve's going to be to be a professional. I suppose they've got their heart on that really. I mean, what's it like for you, sort of? I suppose to have to. I mean, you go watch a team play and players play and. To say, I mean, you mentioned each other straight up with people, which is great. That's what you want, really. But what's it like sometimes, sort of, saying to someone, "Well, I don't think, you got the ability to." I mean, is there a way that you sort of do that, Steve, with people?
Yeah, I think you're right there. You've got to be careful what you say to children, because obviously then you can dampen their spirits. You say, look, you're not. There's certain aspects and attributes that Burnley look for within players at certain ages. We've got a model called a Clarence model, which we followed quite closely. And if you don't come up to those models, you've got a chance with other teams, because Burnley play a different style.
Yes.
Other teams play a different style, so you can never say never. And obviously give them a bit of a helping hand, saying that they're good at some things, and don't knock this confidence, because you don't want to stop them from playing from football, because that's what a lot do. They do drop out of football because of getting that turn back and that sort of neglect from clubs, really. Saying, "Oh, you're not good enough," and but yeah, just talking. There's ways and means of talking to children, in there, and you've got to be honest with them and the parents as well. So
Absolutely.
definitely.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I suppose that's where the training comes in too. I mean, having, like you said before, sort of training in that is beneficial, because obviously that can sort of help, the scout in terms of communication, really. I suppose especially these days, things, the world's changed, and it's I suppose it's for the young people. I suppose, like you said, it's sort of encouraging them to sort of find their level, really. But did you find the training for you, sort of learning about scouting, helped you, Steve, or?
It helped me massively, really, because it opened my eyes up to different things. At the moment, I'm scouting. As I say, I'm scouting juniors from 9s up to under 18s. The first ever venture into scouting, I went to work in a first team environment at a Polish club, which I was lucky enough to get hold of, and I was watching English players from League 1 and League 2 over here. I really enjoyed that side of it all. But I wanted to go down and learn the whole sort of system of scouting, from the bottom grassroots to academy. And obviously I want to get back into doing first team again, because I think I've been trained really well by a good mentor of mine, Colin Chambers, who I don't think he minds me talking about, at the International Professional Scouting Organisation in Blackburn. He's given me a massive helping hand with his experiences, what he's had over 20 odd years in professional scouting at the very top, in Premier League football. So
yeah,
and you look at, you go out scouting and you pick little things up for yourself as well, which you sort of like think, oh yeah, I can do that a bit easier. And as you say, you learn as you go along, like anything in life, don't you, really? So
absolutely. And I suppose we're all on our own journey, and people sort of listening to the show who are thinking about getting into scouting, and I know it's hard to give anyone any tips, because we're all on our own sort of journey. But what would you say, Steve, to anyone sort of considering going into scouting? I mean, what are some things that you've sort of learnt along the way that might be sort of useful to someone sort of tuning in, thinking, okay, I'm sort of considering going into that, but I'm not quite sure?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of things that's involved with scouting. You don't realise. People just think, you turn up on a muddy pitch on a Sunday or a Saturday morning watching a team of football, but there's a lot of rules and regulations. You've got to let the opposition team know that you go, and you can't talk to children. You've got to approach coaches, and then there's a ways then of bringing children in. You've got to write report writing, and then you've got to obviously scouting is just not a once-time visit. It's 2 or 3. That's the ING at the end of scouting, really. And you've got to watch players develop, because you can go to some games and you can see players that, they're not good enough at one time, but in 2 or 3 months' time, when they've had if they go to a different club or they've had a different coach, then obviously something can just kickstart their enjoyment more in football, and you can see how they've learned and they've developed. So it's a matter of time, really, scouting, as you say. Watching them quite a few times, a player, giving them the chance to see if they've developed in different areas.
Absolutely. So, No, that's really interesting stuff. And do you find, Steve, that when you sort of turn up to a ground and that sort of stuff, I mean, what's the sort of atmosphere? I suppose I'm just thinking in terms of a footballer, knows the scouts there, in terms of their performance. Do you sort of find that the scout turns up and maybe sort of footballers might feel a bit sort of nervous and think this is our opportunity to sort of? But I suppose you said there before you come back and monitor players too.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's a good thing and a bad thing, because sometimes when you do go and watch grassroots football, you've got to go in actually the club colours, the club tracksuit, really, and because you've got to stand away from. I think it's the Premier League rules as well that you've got to go dressed in the club colours. But if you go to a normal academy games, then you've just got to go in normal clothing, to other professional clubs. But as you said, you want to see players in different environments. Now, a player, to me, if he knows I'm coming, I want to see if he can cope under that pressure as well. And it'd be good to go and see him, even knowing that you're not there, how does he cope, not under pressure? There's a lot of things that you want to find out about that player, and those 2 things are massive. What's his attitude like when you're watching him and he knows you're there, and what's his attitude like when you're not there as well?
Absolutely. That's a great point, and I suppose for any sort of young player listening there, that's sort of key. It's not just about on the field; it's also off the field too. It's sort of general attitude, and I suppose in a game that's as competitive as football, that could be the margin, Steve, where it might be sort of also just the player's attitude to training and other things as well.
You've just picked up their attitude is probably the number one thing in a scout. What they've got to watch for, not just the attitude towards the scout, the attitude towards the parents when they're playing football, the attitude towards the coach when he's coaching, the attitude towards referees, people in charge, officials, attitude towards their own teammates and their opposition. There's lots of things you've got to look at that, definitely, yeah.
Absolutely. And I suppose, in your experience, you'll have heard sort of, people talk about players and sort of, what I find interesting about scouts, Steve, is sort of, no doubt, people, if you go watch a team or players or someone tells you to go watch a player, you might get, especially off parents, a confirmation bias or maybe even coaches, I suppose, in that respect. But how do you sort of deal with that in terms of, people telling you that their son can run 100 metres in 10 seconds and, kick left foot, right foot from the halfway? And, obviously, we all want the best for our children, but, and our players. But how do you sort of go in there for sort of clean slate and think, I'm just going to see it as it is type thing?
Yeah, well, that's what you got to do. What you just said there, you got to go in every game open-minded with every children. But as you said there, you do find yourselves in situations where the parents know there's a scout there and they'll come behind you. And obviously, you don't know names because you don't get team seats at that level. And they're shouting, "Go on, Bobby! That's my Bobby there," and stuff. He's look how good he is. And you're thinking, "Oh no, please don't go away." But it's interesting. But as you say, people do ask you. As I said before, you've got to be truthful with them and just say, look, he's not as good as at the moment for us, but there's plenty of time. He's only young and they're going to develop, and he could go somewhere else within 2 or 3 months. He could be a lot better player. Yeah. So you should never ever say never with anybody really. So
absolutely. Absolutely, that's true. And I suppose the other side is true too. Maybe sort of certain players, people talk them down type thing, and you turn up and you think, wow, this person's got something for sure. It works the other way as well too, sort of, But I suppose on the subject of Burnley, Steve, it's probably possibly outside your ear, but I've always wondered that there are a club that have punched above their weight for, at least in my opinion, really, in terms of the size of the town. What sort of is in terms of from what you can see, is that like a collective effort? They're sort of always a strong team, Burnley, sort of obviously Premier League, and I was speaking to someone a few weeks ago on radio who played for Burnley. As well, and it was really interesting, really, in terms of his insight into training and the way things are run and that sort of stuff. But is that sort of fair to say? Burnley always sort of there and thereabouts, really, sort of doing well.
Yeah, definitely, you're right. Obviously, there's small fish in a big sea out there, really, with the surroundings of your Manchester United, your Manchester Cities, your Liverpools, and it's always hard to get players. Younger players coming in because they're going to choose the bigger clubs. But going back to the way the Burnley where they play under Sean Dyche, he's done a fantastic job. The guy there, I've been involved in a couple of other professional clubs, and when I came to Burnley, I found out that so many people wanted to talk to you. They were so so pleasant and it's just a warming club, really. It's a family club. And people just wanted, even though I'm just a scout, really, and you're thinking, no, you're not just a scout, Steve. You're part of the team, and everybody's pulling together. They've gone from a Category 3 club, academy club, into a Category 1 club within a certain amount of years, and it's a fantastic achievement for the club and for the town, really.
Absolutely.
I'm not a Burnley fan, but I always think now it's one of the first games. I'm a big Huddersfield Town fan for all my sins, but with me being a Yorkshire lad. But it's always probably now the first result I look for because I want to make sure they're doing well, the first team.
Absolutely. And interesting you mentioned Huddersfield too. Obviously they are, as well. They're a strong traditional club, and you see a lot of clubs as well trying to, get into the Premier League, and it's not easy. Some huge clubs. Have struggled to get back in the Premier League. So, like you says there, obviously you've got a lot of big clubs as well, and I suppose in terms of say producing players, going forward, that makes scouting even more important. Do you think, Steve, in terms of sort of finding good players who can sort of progress through the system?
Yeah, definitely important. Yeah, because as you say, you've got a lot of competition in that area in the northwest. It's a hotbed of football, really, your Manchester and Liverpool areas, and you'd be surprised how many, Liverpool lads we've got in our club, really, that are doing really, really well. And we've sort of like beat the Evertons and the Liverpools to them, and the Man United. So yeah, there's a great. I think that the club are all pulling together. I've got a great head recruitment, great scouting system network that they work with in Burnley. Everybody's pulling together. We sort of tend to look at the grassroots area before we do looking at buying players, because obviously we can't compete with buying players in academies with the Uniteds and the Cities.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's where the players are, the gems are in the grassroots sort of areas. So.
No, absolutely. And that's why it's really interesting, Steve. So I suppose if you're a player as well as football, you'd be thinking, okay, I might have a better chance to sort of play, progress at Burnley than I would do. I mean, that's sort of all relative to each individual, but I suppose in one sense you could say, okay, well, you know, obviously likes of Man United, Man City, to go out there, buy huge transfer fees, and you know, you want to get established in the team as sort of, if it's possible. Do you think that could be a sort of a draw card for teams like Burnley in terms of players thinking, well, actually, you know what, it's a good place to play my football. I can focus and I've got a chance to sort of, maybe a bit better chance to get through than I would at a City or United.
Yeah, definitely, because I would say I think you're looking at where Manchester City and Manchester United cast the net over. You know, they can bring anybody. They've got fantastic pulling power. They certainly should have, because they're both brilliant clubs. But I always say to people that I bring in, or players I bring in, you know, if you get asked by your Liverpools or your Evertons, go in and try them, because you're going to learn something from everybody, really.
Absolutely.
It makes a difference. You know, you go back to your moral responsibilities again, and you know, and I think that's what people like about Burnley, when they say just they're not bothered about, well, they are bothered because you want them to come into Burnley, but go and try other clubs as well and learn things. And I think that we've got an open-minded philosophy, really, of treating children that way, and I think that helps a lot in thinking, well, Burnley, you know, they're okay, where your Leeds or your Sheffields or your Manchester United, they want you to just constantly stay with that club, where we don't. You know, obviously we don't want them to sign, but we want them to learn as well and develop as children, as young people as well as they're growing up. Absolutely,
and that's really interesting too in terms of the fan base. I mean, one thing, Steve, sort of off-piste, I mean, I help out a little bit at a club over, you know, Bacup. It's not too far away from Burnley, but a lot of the young players, for example, some of them sort of are Burnley fans, and you've got the United fans as well, and I sort of find that sort of, you know, Burnley has had an impact on the players in terms of them sort of gravitating to the club. So they've got to be doing something right, obviously, to sort of, you know, we all sort of like the local club type thing, but do you find that that's sort of a big thing for Burnley, sort of communal club, but, you know, the young players sort of do sort of in the area support the club as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a massive thing. You know, if you're a supporter, you want to play for your club, don't you?
Yeah.
You know, when I was a young lad, I was watching Huddersfield when I was 12, 13. I'd love to play for them, but obviously I wasn't that good. So, but yeah, that's a massive influence, and I think we do have a lot of coaches in the community that do go around your schools and travel in the local areas and get kids involved with that as well. And we've actually got a few coaches that've got private academies as well within the areas, which is good. So they push the Burnley sort of model out there as well in their own private academies, so they're getting players in, which is important. But yeah, the people at Burnley, as I say, Huddersfield Town is my team, and they're very similar within the size and the actual town, you know, the heritage and everything. And there's a lot of similarities between them both. But obviously, my team's now playing Championship, and Burnley's still in the Premier League. So that's the downside, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, that's the sort of thing, really. I suppose it's sort of, the Premier League's a very competitive league, and to get back in the Premier League is not easy as well. We've seen some big clubs go down and not come back up, and it isn't easy, that's for sure. But you know, I suppose all any team can do is just try and get everything right on and off the field, and see how we go from there. Really, that's the sort of key to it. But what about in terms of moving forward, Steve? For you, I mean, obviously, you know, they're probably going to keep things sort of close to your chest. But what's your sort of vision? I mean, where do you sort of see yourself moving forward? More of the same, or you know, to keep getting out there and sort of looking for players, and sort of what sort of you know your vision as a scout?
Yeah, I think. Well, I'm really enjoying myself at the moment. It's a fantastic club. But obviously, football can change, can't it, straight away? You never know what's going to happen with Burnley. If they do get relegated, will Sean Dyche leave? Will there be big changes within the club? What happens then is other people start bringing their own people in, and then you end up getting kicked out of the club like I did previously at Wolverhampton Wanderers 3 or 4 years back. and then I don't know. If I could carry on doing what I'm doing now, and hopefully I'm doing well. Another thing that I always like is feedback from people, making sure I'm doing things right. Can I get better? Which is always important. I think, not just in football, but in your normal life as well. You always look at yourself. But yeah, I think my main aim is to get back. Well, I'd love to get back to doing first team football again. But as I say, at the moment, I'm enjoying myself at Burnley. Fantastic club. That's all I can say. Really, they're doing really well.
Absolutely. No, it's good for you, Steve. It's it seems like you sort of you found yourself in that role, and all the best to you. Hopefully. Like he says there, it's just football being the way it is, but yeah, it's all you can do is keep going. But it's been great speaking to you, Steve. I found it really interesting. No doubt our guests, our sort of listeners, our audience have found it really interesting to get a perspective on scouting. That's for sure. So we really want to thank you for the show, Steve. So and wish you all the best.
Thank you as well. Really enjoyed it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Steve.
Nice to meet yourself as well.
Thanks, Steve. That was Steve Martin. He's the Pro Academy Scout Coordinator at Burnley Football Club. He's been really kind to join us on the Salford City Radio Friday Sports Show and give us an insight into scouting, what it involves and his own experiences. And I'm sure you'll have found it as interesting as I have. And we wish him all the best. And thank you for coming on board the Friday Sports Show on Salford City Radio 94.4 FM.